Brian Limberg found out early on that proving people wrong can be very motivating.
Sometimes people kind of like doubt you, I guess, and it kind of like drives you more. Odds are against you, so you kind of feel like the underdog, and you're just, it kind of pushes you even harder.
Welcome to What Moves You, a Speedway Motors podcast telling the stories behind the cars and the people who build and drive them. I'm Joe McCullough, and today Brian Limberg joins us to talk about his journey to mastering sheet metal fabrication, building Tin Man's Garage into a successful business, and what it's like to win the Slonaker. How did you first get into cars and working on cars?
It's definitely through my dad. He's been into hot rods ever since I could remember, and he had a handful of cars. I remember he had a 31 Model A Roadster that he built when I was really young in the 80s, and had a small block Ford in it, and he had a 34 Ford Coupe that he had when I was a little bit older. After those two cars, he's had, 58 Chevy pickup truck and a handful of other stuff. So I've always been around it growing up.
So I was lucky enough, as you know, to work with your dad here at Speedway, and he would bring in pictures. He would show me these hot rods that he had over the years. So I remember seeing pictures of that Roadster and pictures of that. That coupe was really nasty. It was like a 33, 34 coupe with a big block in it. Do you remember the Roadster, or were you too young?
I don't remember the Roadster like firsthand. I remember, I've seen pictures of it, obviously, so I feel like I remember it, but I really don't have any memories of being in the car. I do have memories of the 34 Ford. It was nasty. I remember him doing, burnouts down the driveway, leaving tire marks, and the neighbors loving that. And remember we were coming back from a show one time, and it had suicide doors on it, but it didn't have any safety catch latches on it. So the door swung open going like 60 down the highway. And I was like, "Ah!" And he's like, are you okay? I'm like, I'm fine. And I'm like looking back. He's like, is the door still there? And it was like slammed into the quarter panel. I do remember that car, but he did sell it at some point and started building some other stuff when I was older, and that's really when I started kind of seeing the build process and kind of going through with him.
Your dad also told me, and I think that this is a funny story because it, to me, kind of illustrates a lot about you guys. The Pinewood Derby thing. Lots of kids do Pinewood Derby with a bandsaw and a belt sander, but you guys kind of took it to the next level, right?
Yeah, he definitely did, and I have to be honest. He kind of took that project over into his own hands. It was, and I can't blame him. He's just so into stuff that. And we didn't live together when I was younger because my parents split up. So, he was working on this stuff, and he just went to the 9 on it. And every year it was just something more crazy. And him and his buddy, and, they had kids, so I was friends with their kids. And they would just build these crazy cars with, they'd machine everything and machine axles and polish them. And they're machining wheels and, lifting one wheel off the ground. They'd have spare wheels and graphite, and they were bending the rules to the point where people were getting angry. But
yeah,
it was interesting to go through that as a kid and just seeing it develop. And he was really good at it, and I was just kind of along for the ride. But it was exciting nonetheless. We did go all the way through the state finals with it and won. So going somewhere and competing against all these other kids with these cars and finally getting this trophy, it's 3.5, 4 foot tall when I was, 9 or something, was definitely something that it was cool to be around and be a part of,
So, as you got older, did you do the normal kid stuff, kids that are into cars, build model cars and look at the magazines and do all that stuff?
Yeah, that was pretty much all I did. I rode my bike a lot. I wasn't into sports, so I remember reading car magazines that my dad had in the bathroom most of the time. But that's where they would be. But just going through the pages and just seeing Street Rodder and Custom Rodder and Rod and Custom, seeing some of these really high end builds and just stuff that was mind blowing. And then I would build model cars, and I was, living with my mom when I wasn't at my dad's. And I remember I was into lowriders for a while, and I'd do those and, make them so that they were in 3-wheel motion, and I'd build hot rods and take, parts. I remember taking like cans off of a semi-truck and turning them into like a moon tank on a 32 Ford and switching flathead motors around. And I remember doing a 56 Nomad. I put a V10 Viper motor in it and changed all the suspension and wheels. And so that was really kind of the norm.
And so, I mean, your dad was not just, it's not like he was selling insurance or doing something else and had a hot rod in garage. Like, he was kind of living the life. He worked for Heights, right? He was the sales manager there for 14 years. So that really was probably a huge gift for me being up, coming around that. It gave him a lot of opportunities and me just being around it. So they'd have the Street Rodder tour cars come by, and he'd drive him home and stuff, that they'd let him take the car out like that night, and and bring it home. And then, they'd always have open houses. And then when I got a little bit older, he asked if I could go with to start helping sell t-shirts. So I would go to like the Louisville Nationals and stuff with them for NSRA, and, going out for dinner with all of these people who own these companies and seeing these builders that you see in the magazines. And, my dad's just talking to them like it's no big deal. And I'm like, the other kids are probably like enamored with like baseball and football players. And I'm like, oh my God, that's Bobby Alloway and Boyd Coddington. Like I was so, excited to be around that, and just being in the industry and at those events was just really fun. So at what point did you start working on full-scale cars?
I was probably a little bit of a late bloomer. I mean, I think, my dad got like a MIG welder when I was probably about 13. I started messing around welding stuff up in the garage. Mm-hmm. I would weld up and cut up bicycles and make weird things. And then as we got the welder, people started asking when they'd order front suspensions locally, like, where could I have this installed? And my dad just built a new garage, so he started doing side work out of his garage. So, right around that time I started helping. And he kind of taught me, front end installation, and then how to modify, the cross members based on wheel and tire size, and, basically how to build a car not reading the directions, but kind of the right way. So, and then before I knew it, he was kind of getting me my own side jobs there, and he was just kind of overseeing it,
Yeah.
So then I bought a 62 Impala from Wisconsin. It was a complete rust bucket, and they weren't really making any parts for it at the time. So I started hammering stuff over pieces of pipe in the garage and bending stuff on the workbench to make, floors and rockers floored and body mounts. And I really liked it. I don't know if I was any good at it, but I liked it.
So, lots of us have stories of working on car stuff when we should have been studying. Was that the case for you?
Oh, definitely. I remember particularly a couple instances where, the teacher would be like, bring up the car magazine, because I would just read it during class, and I'd bring it up and I'd reach into my bag and pull out another one. And it was just like, after 3 of them, they just gave up because they just knew there was just more in the bag and they weren't going to win. And then I remember one teacher in middle school, Mr. Morgan, one of my friends reminds me of this occasionally. We saw him at a car show, and he's like, are you going to tell him or remind him? I'm like, no, it's not that big of a deal. But I was reading something, and he yelled at me, and he's like, you're never going to amount to anything reading those car magazines. So I gave it to him. My buddy's like, you should go remind him of that. I'm like, it's just not that big of a deal. It's just, I find it funny now more than anything. I'm not trying to prove anything to my 5th grade geography teacher. But
so when did you figure out that you might want to build cars for a living?
I think my last year of high school, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I was watching car TV shows on Sunday morning like I normally did. And, this thing for Wyotech came up, and they had like a hot rod program or street rod. And I was like, man, I don't know what else I want to do. And that was the only thing that really got me excited. So I met with the guy to go, and, Corley's a salesman, of course, so that helped, get me on that track. And, it was funny because my dad, with him even being in the hobby, he's like, I don't think you should do this. This isn't a good way to make a living. I mean, he's looking out for my best interest. He's like, I think you should be an electrician. And I'm like, well, I don't want to be an electrician. Like, it's not about the money. It's about doing what I love, so.
Yeah.
not that it was a huge problem. It wasn't like not supporting me, but it's just you think of these little things along the way that sometimes people kind of like doubt you, I guess, and it kind of like drives you more.
Oh yeah.
And pushes you to just like excel because like, you know, odds are against you. So you kind of feel like the underdog and you're just, you know, it kind of pushes you even harder. So yeah, I ended up going to Wyotech like right after I graduated.
And while you're at Wyotech, you know, there's lots of different, you know, you could get into engine building or chassis building or whatever, but what was it about sheet metal shaping that kind of sucked you in?
I really didn't know that I was really into the metal shaping part. I just really wanted to go to build cars. You know, I liked that part, but I didn't even know like what the machines were. Like I didn't even know what existed. I went there and there was an instructor when I took street rod was Matthew Harris, and he taught the sheet metal section, and his passion and enthusiasm for the whole concept of shaping metal from a flat panel really hit something in me that I didn't know I had. You know, like looking at all those cars in the magazines, like the Cadzilla and the Aluma Coupe that Boyd did. You know, like nobody was building bodies like that big of sections from scratch that I saw. You know, I mean, there was people doing it, but I didn't know about it. Like coach building, I didn't even know that was a thing. So he kind of really, after his lecture, and he kind of took me under his wing in school and let me work on some really good projects there. I was hooked. I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to focus on metal shaping. It's like, I don't want to build engines. I don't want to do body and paint. It's like, I want to shape metal. So he was definitely put me on that path.
So is that where you started building your roadster?
I didn't build it there. My dad was in the middle of starting his roadster. He built a T roadster pickup. It was pretty wild. It's got, you know, like an 8-point cage in it, really low cantilever coilovers in the back with a really healthy forward small block. But I mean, it was built like a race car. You know, I really didn't even have any goals of building a car. It's funny, I had my notes from school, and I looked back through those. I moved, you know, a couple times, and my mom moved recently, so there's a bunch of garbage I had to go through. And you find stuff, you know, and I found my notes, and I would go through, and I saw doodles of like cars, and a lot of them were rough concepts of my roadster, and I didn't even think anything of it. You know, I was just doodling in class, and my dad was building that car, so I was kind of drawing something off of that, but like kind of just in my own head as we were lecturing. And it's funny, I haven't told anybody this. This is the first time, so I hope it doesn't. It just the stuff pops in my head when we're talking about it, but you know, one of the instructors got upset with me. You had these competencies you'd have to do to grind a specific way so the disc hits the panel a certain way, and I had to stand backwards into a corner because it was just a situation, and he saw me, and he like was in front of people, and he like yelled at me and had to redo my competency, and I argued with him and told him that, you know, the reasons why this situation it would be okay, and he just wasn't listening. That went on, and then I was doodling in class, and I had some questions, so I stayed after class one day to talk to one of the instructors, and we were talking about, I had some questions about like track width versus wheelbase, and like if there was like a ratio of you know, one specific to the other for handling, and like I was doodling some stuff, and the instructor overheard this, and he came up there, and he's like, what was your question? And I'm like, oh God, like, you know, he's gonna ream me again, you know, like I'm such an idiot. So I said the question like really hesitantly, and he just looks at me like really seriously. He's like, do you want to work here? And I'm like, why is this guy such a jerk? You know, like, why is he such a jerk to me all the time? Like, what does he have it out for me? So I just stood there and looked at him. And he's like, no, really, like after you get done with school, you want to work here? And I'm like, you know, I was just taken back. I mean, I was like honored, but it was still just kind of weird, you know?
Yeah.
It's like I'm trying to learn. I'm just trying to absorb everything I can. And I'm asking questions, so I don't really think I can work there, you know? But as time went on, and I look back now, it's like there was all these signs, you know, that maybe I was set up to do something, you know, more, and you know, maybe be a little more independent on my own. So, So looking back, I haven't told anybody that. Maybe it slipped my mind, or I just didn't want to come off as being arrogant or something. But it just, one of those little things, those little signs you look back on that, it probably helped guide you.
Right.
So yeah, no, that was a great experience. I learned a lot going to school, and then when I got out, I got right into the industry and went to work.
And what were you doing then? What was your first job out of school?
I luckily got an opportunity from Hopperstead Customs. They did a lot of street rod stuff. It was all pre-48. So, being in the Rust Belt, a lot of the cars, and the cars are all older. We did a lot of rust repair, but a lot of these cars, a lot of them you couldn't buy all the panels for. So I was having to make a lot of the stuff. And he was really good with the Polmax, had a lot of dies. So I really learned a lot about the Polmax and the intricacies and the flexibility of that machine and how to make dies and how to make those complex panels. And I just did a lot of rust repair, door bottoms, door skins, floors, and just that's pretty much all I did. But it was a great experience.
And so how did you then, is that when you started building your Roadster?
It was. I wasn't there for probably more than 6 months, and he had a big collection of vintage sheet metal and axles and stuff out back from projects that weren't used or just stuff he's collected. So at lunch breaks, I'd kind of wander around after I was done eating and just kind of peruse through. It was like a swap meet, just with everything back there, and your mind just starts looking at stuff. And he had a Model A sedan there, and I kept looking at it. I'm like, man, I really like to cut that up and like turn it into a roadster body, again, based off like my dad's Roadster. But
right.
And then I talked to him about it, and I'm like, hey, do you think you'd sell that? And he's like, I don't know if I'll sell that one. I can't remember exactly if it was like he'd sell that or he was going to sell me some parts or he'd find me another one. I don't remember what the deal was, but it was kind of put in motion. So I started putting tape lines on it and stuff at lunch and taking pictures and just try to get rough measurements, and then one of the guys that worked there, Bill Saunders, he's kind of like watching me do this, and he's like, why don't you just build it from scratch? And I looked at him like, are you effing crazy? Like, what do you mean build it from scratch, And he's like, well, by the time you get done cutting it all up and cutting the roof off and moving this and that and fixing the rust, he's like, you're not going to have anything left of it. I said, why don't you just build it? And I'm like, yeah, that's not possible. So I kind of like walked away, and then, I let it settle in for a couple weeks, and I was like thinking about it. I'm like, maybe that is a thing, maybe that is possible. So I decided to do it, because that's what I've been so passionate about, like these big projects. And it's like, well, this is your perfect opportunity. It doesn't cost much to buy material. Steel was cheap back then. It is relatively cheap in comparison to buying a whole car, but so yeah, I just started taking measurements off of that car and other cars and sort of just started bending and forming and using cardboard to just kind of design the car as I went.
So I remember seeing you and that car in Rod and Custom magazine, and I don't remember what year it was, but I was in college still, and seeing that, I don't want to overstate the significance of this just because we were talking, but that was really one of the first, other than like, seeing Craig Naff build a roof skin for Cadzilla is one thing, but seeing then this guy who is kind of about the same age as me basically scratch built this hot rod, I was like, man, that's pretty cool. Like, is that really, I kind of had the same experience that you did, only seeing your car. Like, is that really a thing? Is that a thing that can happen? And I think that was one of the moments that sort of sparked me to think that, if you can learn how to shape metal, then you can be kind of unstoppable,
I mean, it was definitely a changing point for me. I mean, it gave me a lot of attention, building that car there. And then I finished it at another shop that I learned a lot from. But, building that car helped me seal the deal in that next position. And then some other people along the way, helped me get some ink with it in bare steel and Rod and Custom. There was like a young builder thing.
Yeah, that's what I saw.
And people really, they like knew my name, or at least knew of me, and it was kind of cool, and I just kept working, and I'd work on it a lot. I mean, I'd go into work early so I could get off early, and I'd just stay there and work on my car like every night, weekends. And I would just, and just keep saving and just, and it was piecemealed off of just junk laying around the shop. It was like, the 40 Ford axle out back that they would take out to put a new rear end in, and the straight axle and the brakes was all stuff that people didn't want. So I would just take that stuff and use it, and for next to nothing, and just figure out how to make it work. So when I did get the car done and debut it, I didn't have the interior done at the time, but it was at Indy in 2006. And I got some awards for like Young Builder and like Solo, and it was a great time, and it was more just the experience of driving it, and my dad was there and all of his buddies and the guys that I worked with at the shop I worked at the time. So it was just having a blast. And then that next winter, I started working with another shop on weekends doing like back half tin work. They did like chromoly door slammer type stuff. So I did all their tin work. I learned a lot about chromoly tubing and stuff, but that allowed me to save up some money to get the interior done and the roof wrapped. And I went back the next year at 2007, and I was going to pre-register, and I got the flyer, and they had put my car on the t-shirt that year from like the year before. So I was jumping up and down and just screaming, like, and I called my dad. I mean, it was like that stuff just doesn't happen, like the car's done and it's debuting done at this show, and your car's on the shirt, So, being 25, it was like being in the Super Bowl to me. So we went that year, and I was able to get a Boyd's Pros pick and a Rod and Custom Top 10.
Oh, that's cool.
And I got offers to be in Street Rodder and Rod and Custom magazine, so that was really cool.
Do you still have it? Do you still have your Roadster?
I do still have it. It hasn't been on the road in a few years. I have that 40 Ford rear end in it with a small block, and those rear ends don't like the power of a small block, so the rear end is currently out of it, and it's on a cart. So I haven't had a chance to fix it, but it's definitely on my list. I've been too busy with the business and that growing and kids and stuff, so it's still there. It's been put on hold, like everybody's projects, unfortunately.
Right. So how did you get from that point? Like, did that car sort of help launch you into your own business then?
It did. It really got my name out there enough and gave me the confidence. At that time, the last shop I was working at, the owner unfortunately passed away, and then the family asked me to manage the shop, and I was honored, and I wasn't expecting to leave. I really wasn't even interested in going out on my own. I just wanted to build cars. And at that time, I started managing their shop, but I was 25. I was the youngest one out of like 7 people in the hot rod shop. So after 2 months, I realized it wasn't going to work, just because of my age, and it just wasn't going to happen. So I said, I'm out of here. I had a relationship with one of the customers, and they had another project that they wanted to start on. So I kind of just took off, and then another one of the customers heard I was leaving, and then they pulled their car and followed me out. So I had 2 cars. I felt a little guilty, but at the end of the day, it's like nobody's going to look out for me except for me. So I just found a building and emptied out my savings account to put down the security deposit for the building, and that was it. And I look back now, and it's like ignorance is bliss, I think, because knowing what I know now, I probably would have never done it, but I didn't know. So I just, and my mom's like, she reminds me now. She's like, remember? And I don't remember. She tells me though that she's like, you told me that the worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to have to work at McDonald's part-time until this works out. So like I didn't think it was going to fail, and if it failed, I would have to get a part-time job. So yeah, it's crazy.
Do you have memories of that, some of those first days and weeks, you've have $0 and you're now suddenly a business owner. Do you remember any of what you were feeling around that time?
Oh, definitely. It's shaped who I am today, and changed me in a good way. Going through those struggles on your own financially, I think really builds a stronger person, not only business wise, but being able to handle the stress of life and customers and all that stuff. So yeah, it's like I took all the equipment out of my garage, moved it into the shop. Then you've got rent, then you've got bills, and I've never lived on my own because I was still living at home with my mom. So it's a shock of, you've got to keep all this going. So the working 40 hours a week on just the cars wasn't enough. It was like you had to work 60 hours on cars, to get enough money to pay the bills. And then the other time you had to, do all the maintenance on the building and the machines and the cleaning and, the billing and all that other stuff. So, I was broke all the time, and luckily my wife at the time had a really good job and she kind of carried us through, because there'd be times I wouldn't take a paycheck home for 4 weeks, because I'd be waiting for someone to pay me, or I need a machine to do a job, and the money I would get in, I'd blow and buy a new lathe or a Pullmax, and I wouldn't have any money. And so I just, I'd spend it all. I get it all in and just, it'd be gone the next day to buy the next piece of equipment for the next job. And it was rough.
Your shop, you're building cars, but you're kind of known for sheet metal work. That's something that you continue to do. Was the workshops that you started teaching, was that around that time? Was that kind of meant to supplement the income?
It really was never intentional. It was kind of fell in my lap. I was building a couple cars, and there was a Good Guys event in Joliet, and I bring a car down there one year and bare steel and try to show off, or not show off, but share what I was doing. And one particular guy was like looking at it, and he's like, "Man, I really want to learn how to do this," And I said, "No, I don't teach workshop. I don't teach people how to do this. Like, I just build cars, He was a super nice guy, so I'd explain to him, how I did everything. And then the next year he came back again, and I had a different car, and he was like still on me with the same stuff. And I remembered him, and I said, why do you want to, learn about this? He's like, well, you got these other workshops out there, but you just watch people do it. You're not actually doing it. Like, I learned hands-on. I'm like, okay, I can understand that. And the economy was kind of slowing down at that time, so not that I was like, it was still rough. Like, I didn't have a lot of like work lined up, but I had some spare time, So I kind of asked a few people at the show, like, that were interested in what I was doing. I said, hey, if I figured out this like workshop thing, would you be interested? And they all like said, yeah. So I spent the winter kind of creating a curriculum and some projects and stuff. And I called them up and we did a little workshop, and they all loved it. So then they told some people. Then we did another one, and then I'm like, well, I'll make a little flyer, and just throw it out there and see what happens. And then you get 6 more, and then it just keeps snowballing. So as time went on, I like workshops is a regular thing now, and I do a handful of them a year. I've had people come from overseas, which I couldn't believe that somebody would travel from Germany for me to teach them about metal shaping. It just like this can't be real.
Yeah.
But, now looking back, I've been doing the workshops for probably 10, 12 years, and I think I've worked with over 120 different people that have traveled. They continually travel from like around the country, so it's pretty cool. And it's like I still learn so much from teaching, because you get people in that have different ideas or different ways of doing things, and it's like, and then they challenge me on what I think I know. So like, it really makes me think harder and really try to work harder, and the way to explain it always has to be different for the person. So it really improves my whole thought process, and because a lot of the stuff is just complicated. It's just like complicated re-engineering when you're trying to figure out how to make stuff. So it's all in all been really good. So now it's kind of like a staple, is this whole workshop thing is part of the business now.
Do you take some pride in that? So metal shaping, it's kind of like a lost language. It's not like kids aren't being taught how to do that in high school anymore. It's not something that everybody knows how to do. Do you take some pride in being able to sort of pass that knowledge on and keep the art sort of moving forward?
I do. I'm really passionate about it, and to have other people really that interested is good. I think, with the internet, again, going back to that, I look at stuff and how things have changed. It's really good for the industry, but there's so much out there that people can't connect the dots. And I think the people that are really teaching these YouTube videos and stuff, everybody's like, why don't you do YouTube videos and why don't you do that? And it's like, well, I don't have the time. Two, you can't fit everything into one YouTube video. It's just, and I get people do it for like income or advertising, but I feel like if you're going to learn, you need to go somewhere and learn from A to Z. And yeah, you can't learn it all in, a couple days, but at least trying to connect the dots with the theory and the fundamentals and building the core so that you can apply it to other things is really important. And that's what I take pride on, is really connecting the dots for people and seeing those light bulbs click of like, I've heard of pre-stretching and I've heard of shape and form, and then when you explain it to them, and everybody's got to be explained it a little bit differently, just because everybody's brain works differently and how they comprehend. But when they get it, it's like that light that comes on. It's like, oh my gosh, this is what I've been missing, and that part's exciting, because it's like, because there was for years I didn't know a lot of the stuff, and I had to go through multiple people and take a little bit from this, a little bit that, study with this person, and then learn on my own and apply it, and it's being able to get people there quicker so they're not throwing as much metal away, making scrap pieces, because they have a little bit better understanding.
And you have sort of taken this all to the next level, and you're actually making your own shaping tools now, right?
Yeah, and this whole thing is kind of come an accident too. So, when that guy talked to me about doing the workshops, I was like, I don't really do that, and then I started doing the workshops, and that became a regular thing. And then people would see the dies that I was using for my plenishing hammers, and they're like, I want your dies. And I'm like, well, I don't do dies. You got to go machine your own. You can copy mine, I'll give you all the specs, but like go make your own. And for years I just would tell people no, because I didn't do that. And then after years, one of the participants found a Milwaukee hammer, and he brought it to me, and he's like, I want everything you have. He's like, I want your dies, and I want all your hoops, like, just do it. And I was like, okay, and I know he was, a little bit, he wasn't joking around. He could afford to pay for it, let's just say. Right. So I'm like, okay, let's sit down and go through my dies and try to like narrow it down to a set, and I contacted a local machine shop, and I said, hey, can we make 6 of these sets? And he worked with me, and I sold him his sets, and I had 5 more. So I called a few people, and then I sold all those, and then it went to 12 sets, then I sold another 12 sets, and then I started putting them on eBay, and then people were buying them there, and then people were asking, do you have dies for this or dies for that? So like, and I had a bunch of vintage plenishing hammers, so, and most of them I had dies already that I had made, or I could just look at it and make dies for it and just change the ends. So then before I knew it, it's like we had just a whole nother side of the business is just making these dies. So, selling hundreds of sets of dies over a few years, and then finally people were like, I want that hammer, the Milwaukee hammer. And I'm like, you got to buy a used one. Yeah. And they were going for, $4,500. I heard sometimes at $5,000 for just the head. And that's in like unknown condition. Like, does it work? Is it broken? I was like, well, let's look into this, So I started re-engineering that and found a foundry, and we, cast the new bodies in the same machine shop that was doing our dies. They worked with us and machining all the air cylinders and the pistons, and they EDM'd the gears, and we figured out, how to harden everything and the tolerances, and we launched that. And I was hoping to sell 50 units in the lifetime of the product, over 30 years. And we sold 50 hammers in like a week after I debuted it for pre-sales. So Now we've sold over 200 plenishing hammers, and they're all over the world. We're selling them to Japan, all these places in Europe. And the reason is that those machines didn't exist over there, so they don't have those from the 40s and the 50s. They just didn't exist. So now they're able to get those machines and use those there for their projects.
And what is it about the Milwaukee hammer and now your hammer that makes it so much better than there's lots of hammers out there. Like, what is it about that Milwaukee hammer that makes it the one that everybody wants?
I think it's a couple things. Faye Butler's really well known in the metal shaping industry. He's like the power hammer professor, and I studied with him for a while. But he's got a Milwaukee, and that's where I first used it. And everybody who's really into it knows that that's what he has. But once you use it and you use other hammers, when you're using it as a handheld, you really understand what makes it excel. One reason is that the piston's very small and it's got a very short stroke, so it's very rapid in the way it hits, so it's got a lot of die overlap in comparison to like a CP hammer that hits very hard and it stretches way too fast. So when you're doing it on a car, you don't want it to stretch fast. You want a light hit. The other thing is it's lightweight and it's easy to hold. And then the ability to change the dies, you can move the head up and down really quick and ratchet it back down within a matter of 20 to 30 seconds, where a lot of the other hammers are a little bit more cumbersome and awkward to try to change dies. So in the professional scenario where you're using this daily and for hours, it really just excels over the competition.
For pictures of Brian and a few of his projects, check out the toolbox at speedwaymotors.com by clicking the toolbox link on the front page. Check out his site at thetinmansgarage.com or his Instagram at tinmansgarage. New episodes of What Moves You come out every 2 weeks on Tuesdays. If you like what you hear, tell a friend to listen to What Moves You on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and anywhere else you listen to podcasts. So in addition to all of this now, seminars and manufacturing the tools, you're still running a hot rod shop building hot rods. Talk about some of the cars that you've built over the years and some of the standouts and how you have grown your shop then to be able to do that as well as all the other stuff you're doing.
I'm looking back now. We've been in business for 15 years, and I think I had a kind of a slow growth in comparison to most shops. Most shops come out of the gate and they come swinging. I think I moved a little bit slower, and I don't know if that's just me being nervous or part of my the way I run my business and try not to live on debt and stuff. I pretty much just bought as I could afford it. So, starting the business too in 2007 was in that huge economic collapse happened, so it really didn't help at that time. But when I first started, I worked by myself, and all I wanted to do was metal work. So I would just do small sections on cars, or not small sections, but like I do all the metal work on a car, and it would leave.
Yeah.
And I learned through those first 5 years that I wasn't getting a lot of recognition because I wasn't completing the whole car. When you're doing restoration work, the downside is that everybody wants the people to think that it's original and that it's never been touched, even though you've grafted, 2 cars, or you rebodied this whole Aston Martin out of aluminum. Nobody will ever know because you don't want them to know. So it's really hard to get, word of mouth from the projects that you complete. So then after 5 years, it's like I realized I kind of needed some help. I was getting a lot of opportunities to build different projects, and I really wanted to do them, but I couldn't do them all by myself. So at that time, I kind of hired my first guy, and then super particular on the way I would do things, and everything we were doing I was doing wasn't like really entry level. So you needed somebody really skilled to do it. So I contacted one of the guys that took my workshop a couple years prior, and he worked locally at a restoration shop, and he was interested in leaving, so it was the perfect opportunity, and he's been with me now for the longest. He's my shop foreman now, and he's extremely talented and really helps run that part of the shop as he kind of oversees a lot of the projects, and he's my right-hand man currently. But as we've grown, we've went to different locations, and I had an opportunity to buy our own building and renovate that and really get the space where we've been able to actually hire on more people and grow the business. And that's happened over the last 5 years. So since that time, we've been able to start doing some higher end builds and doing complete builds versus before when it was just me and him or me by myself. So one of our biggest builds that we were able to build from beginning to end was this 36 Willys pickup that we built and competed at the Al Slonaker Award at the Grand National Roadster Show in 2020.
And you won. I mean, that was they had given that award, but like that was the award was sort of made more prominent that year, and you won it. Talk about that experience.
Yeah, it was, the whole idea of the Slonakers, they wanted to kind of revamp the award and kind of compete with the Riddler in Detroit, which we were not eligible to participate in because the car has been seen by the public. Right. There's been a lot of controversy about the rules of that show and the judging. I won't get too much into that, but it's a very common feeling by most of the people in the industry. So I think this new award with the Slonaker from the Grand National has been kind of open arms to a lot of builders, is that you can still show your work during the build and still debut the car, because these cars, that particular car, I think we had like 12,000 man hours in it, and we worked on it for 8 years, and it's just, and it wasn't worked on 8 years solid, but there'd be times we would take breaks waiting for parts, or, and it was never intended to be turn into what it was. It just kind of grew into that. But that particular truck, I built the whole chassis on it. It's all out of 4130 chrome moly tube, but we have like 2,000 hours in the chassis, and it's all tubing. That the rear end is all the brake package and the narrowing, and then all the ladder bars, the front axle, basically everything on the truck is from scratch. We built the whole thing around an Arius V6 Hemi, which there's only supposed to be like one of 5 engines that they made for that. So super, super monster engine, kind of in a little project. So that was kind of the jewel, and the whole thing was built around that motor.
And talk about that when they called your name and said that you guys had won the award. What was going through your head?
I really didn't know what was going on. I felt like I wasn't there. It was just like I was just this empty body just standing there. I really didn't know. It was a lot to take in. I didn't kind of comprehend until afterwards what happened. This sounds weird, but I'm glad they didn't ask me to say anything, because I probably would have just stood there and just went the whole time. So, but no, that car itself, was our first complete, and we did so much work to that car and the redesign of it, and we take such pride in details and doing such a large scale and making it look, like we didn't do anything, that to get that honor really helped push our name out to that next level again. It reminds me of back with my car, but taking it to that next level. And getting that publicity. We built the whole cab from scratch on that, from the windshield back. We redesigned the cab and built that from scratch. The bed was made from scratch. The back fenders was made from scratch. The whole front end, we've redesigned all the hood and the hood sides and the fenders. There's probably only like 40% left of the original sheet metal on the front, and everything else has been completely reworked. But having that opportunity from the customer, allowing us to take it to that level, has really been a blessing, and definitely going to be probably the highlight of my career at this point. It was really stressful on myself and the shop and everything, and it's fun building that show car stuff to a point, but at the end of the day, getting back to down to earth and building stuff that's just nice and able to drive is really where we kind of want to be.
And, it was kind of cool for me to see, from a distance, to see you guys win that award, because I had been, your dad had been showing me pictures. Anytime you would send something to him, he would show it to me like, look at this crazy thing that they did to this Willys pickup. So I kind of had little windows into that build, as it was going on. So it was really cool to see it all come together, and then to see you guys win the award.
Yeah, he was definitely a big supporter. And even after the truck was done, he went with me to a bunch of shows when we were showing it, and just just hanging out with him, and he was my biggest fan at those shows. It was kind of honestly a little bit embarrassing because we'd talk to people and he'd be like, yeah, he built it, his shop, and he's just going on. I'm like, Dad, shut up, like you're embarrassing me, I'm a 30-something-year-old man, just back off a little bit, like, let them figure that out on their own. They don't need to tell them. But looking back now, those are the moments that I definitely, miss the most.
Well, yes. I mean, your dad passed away. Was it a couple years now?
Yeah, it's coming up in a couple years here.
And I mean, it was sudden. None of us saw it coming. Now that you're almost a couple years on, how are you dealing with all of that?
It's still tough. When he's always lived out of state since, I don't know, since I went to tech. Ever since then, he's been out of state, so it's been 20 years. Yeah. So we didn't spend a lot of time, together physically, but we talk on the phone occasionally, and we just had that common bond because it was the same passion, So when we would hang out, it was cool. We didn't get to work together as much as we did when I was a kid, and that's where the stuff I really liked was working in the garage with him and hanging out with his friends at car shows and drinking beer, and that was the good times. Yeah. But I've got stuff to remind me of him all over. I've got pictures and stuff, and I've luckily inherited a couple of his projects. And it kind of came at the right time because, coming into my later 30s, your life starts to change in a way that, you kind of start doing things, and you might be in a position you never expected to be, and you're like wanting to get back to, maybe something when you were younger, or maybe make a change that people call like a midlife crisis. And I wasn't quite there, but I was looking for something else to get me back in the game here. Like running a shop this big, it's not the same as working by yourself, and the joys and the struggles. And that's really, when you asked about how hard it was, and it was hard, but you know what, that's what made it fun. And now it's hard in a different way, but it's just it's not the same. It doesn't have that that excitement. So I've kind of turned it around. I'm trying to make a positive out of this, as much as I can, I guess you could say. I don't want to say it that way, but I've got two boys myself. I've got a 10-year-old and a 3-year-old, and I with my dad's two cars, he's got a Fairlane and a Nova that has to be finished. It's unfortunate that he never actually started the car. It was that close to starting and firing. Oh, man. So, I don't have the space at the shop here, and I don't like keeping my personal projects at the shop, because then I feel like it's just, people are like, why is that in here? Or then the thing is, you're never working on it because you're always working on something else. Yeah. So luckily I have the support of my wife, and she's like, we should build a garage at our house so you can, keep the cars there and you have some place to work on them. So that's the last couple of years I've been focusing on that. We built a small detached garage for my roadster and his two cars. And I'm kind of setting up a little shop. So we'll have a Bridgeport and a mill and some bandsaws and a TIG welder. I got everything here too, but it's just, when you come here, it's a challenge of, people knowing that you're there and wanting to stop in. And not that I don't like talking to people, but you kind of want to work on your own projects. So now having this at home, I'm finishing the garage up, and I'm going to, it'd be nice to have the kids around those projects, being able to help finish Grandpa's Nova and, see it through the process and hear it run for the first time. And, the testing and the tuning and, fixing the problems that will come up and trying to figure that stuff out. I mean, I know they're young, but keeping them around it is what my goal is now, is to, keep them involved. And even if they don't get into it for a living, at least hopefully it'll be a hobby. And, I'd like to be able to pass these cars down to them if they're interested at all. So that's kind of my new excitement for myself, is kind of going back to when I was younger, and, the excitement of trying to put a new little shop together and starting on these projects and, back by myself and, with my kids is really what I'm excited about now. for just myself, just on my, spare time. So.
Do you think about Mike when you walk out there and you flip the switch on and there sits his cars?
Oh yeah, definitely. And I've been struggling with this the last 2 years. The car's been in storage for a year while the garage is getting up, and then I'm finishing drywall and electrical, and I start moving stuff in, and I had all of his stuff in boxes, and then the stuff I've collected over the years that I don't feel right putting it in my shop because it's too personal, memorabilia and stuff that is important to me, but like nobody knows why I have that specific surfboard or, like the story behind it. That's all stuff that's important to me. And when I start opening his stuff up and then moving my stuff in, it's just like, it's been rough. And, going through his tools and combining them with my tools, and it's like, it's been a process. So every time I'd come in, my wife's like, how did tonight go? And it's like, well, I kind of didn't get that much done because I was going through pictures or, and I've got, his stuff and my stuff. And I think as time goes on, it'll probably get easier. It'll never go away. But it's something that makes me really think about my time with my kids and really cherish what time I do have with them. Because it's the stuff that you don't think about until it's gone. And so I'm trying to learn from it and trying to improve, my relationship as being a father, and just trying to make, keep that going and live the next 30, 40 years and, have fun. So
your dad did everything the right way in the shop. There was no shortcuts. There was no cutting corners. You could ask him to hurry through something and he would just not do it. And that's a lesson that is hard for a young person to learn. And so I, working alongside him, got really good at getting started doing something the wrong way. And, he was always very patient, but always made it clear to me that I was doing it the wrong way and that he didn't want to see me do it that way.
Yeah.
And I still think about that. If I'm in my own garage, I start to hurry through something and I kind of see that look on your dad's face still in my memory and like, maybe I should give it a beat and actually do this the right way. Do you do that? Do you kind of think about him like that?
Yeah, I look at it. I think it's more embedded into me to a point where I don't even realize I do it. Hearing it from you, I realize it's a thing, but I think that's what I drive everybody crazy for about that works with me. Sometimes, and I've learned, and again, it's a learning experience for me too, is that you got to back off a little bit because it's just, there's certain things that, doing it right and doing it nice is always expected, but making actually everything down to like the minute detail is something that isn't important when it's underneath and hidden somewhere, or, you're never going to see it. It's still going to be nice, but it's like, you don't need to go in there with a machinist gauge and measure the edge radii of every corner. But, but that's the stuff that, when I look at anything like art or, any kind of like woodworking or stuff that you notice as those details and that craftsmanship. And I think that that's what my dad was really about, is craftsmanship. And even from a young age, he was always doing projects around the house and building retaining walls and, doing landscaping work. And I like doing all that stuff too. Like working on my house is like another favorite thing I like to do. It's just craftsmanship. It's having a project, figuring out and having it be big enough that like you don't know how to do it, and it's the challenge of figuring out how to do it, and then doing it well and making it look nice when it's done. It's just like a really rewarding process that I really enjoy. So it doesn't necessarily have to be cars. It's just that's like the media that was chosen, but you can look at every aspect of like, craftsmanship as being an art form.
So what do you have planned for the future? You built this shop at home. What are you looking forward to for the business or in your personal life going forward?
Our business is continuing to grow. We currently have 10 people on payroll, so it's definitely busy in here. We've got an old building that I purchased for the shop. It's a 1950s Chrysler car dealership building, so it's been a rental property for years, and it's been kind of I joke about it, it's kind of like my leaky boat project. If you've seen Shawshank Redemption, where Morgan Freeman is standing on his boat at the end on the beach, that's what I feel like with this building. It's just like my new project, and we're actually finishing up in the next year these renovations in the front to have a showroom / assembly room, and we're gonna be moving all of our machinery for our shaping and workshops that we use daily into this middle room, so I can teach more workshops that will be more advanced. So we're gonna do some workshops where it's a little bit more smaller classes with more hands-on, taking it a little bit further, so it's like it's kind of an advanced situation. And then that way I don't have to shut the production shop down. Another goal that I have is to grow just a little bit more and hopefully get another 1 to 2 employees so we can keep up with our current workload. I'm hoping that I can be able to hire a manager that can kind of help me manage the business a little bit, so I can step away from that and kind of get back into the shop a little bit and be a little bit more hands-on again. So, currently I'm fortunately getting pulled in 100 different directions. I don't get that much time in the shop, which, having a shop at my house is really what's, keeping me going, getting that hands-on portion that I really crave. But I ultimately want to get back in the shop, but there's just so many moving targets that it's hard to find somebody that I trust and afford to have somebody, pay somebody to help you do that aspect of it. So
other than finishing up your dad's cars, do you have any personal projects that you're looking forward to?
I do. I want to get my Model A back on the road, but I've been collecting parts for a 66 GT40 MK1 for years. I really want to build that complete car from scratch. It's really my bucket list car that I really want to finish. And it's not so much the finishing and driving it. I just really want to build it. The build is really what gets me excited again. Driving it's fun, but if I had a choice between, if I got up in the morning and I didn't have anything to do, I'd rather be in the garage working on something than out driving something.
Yeah.
But I've got the fiberglass body for that car. I wanted to be able to duplicate in aluminum. But I've got a dual overhead cam mod motor of the first generation and a Quay 5-speed transaxle that's for that car. And I've got a C5 Corvette suspension I want to use loosely just for the spindles and some of the geometry. And I've got the wheels and tires, and that's pretty much all I need. Everything else I'm going to make. I want to do a full chromoly tube chassis and just kind of build it pretty much like a race car for the street. And that's my next dream project. So I've got to get some of this other stuff taken care of with, the business, the building, and kind of get some of these other projects finished. And that's going to be my main focus for myself for the remainder of my life, I could say. But that's my main goal, is to work on that car and eventually get that done.
Thanks to Brian Limberg for being our guest today, and thanks to all of you for listening to What Moves You, a Speedway Motors podcast. To see photos and watch video we referenced in today's episode, visit the toolbox at speedwaymotors.com. Email the podcast at podcast@speedwaymotors.com, and if you like what you heard, tell a friend where to find us. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.